we're back. You're listening to A Public Affair on listener-sponsored community radio WORT. I'm Judith Siers-Poisson, where we're talking with Sol Kelley-Jones, who is a Madison native and one of the people we should be most proud of having come out of our community. Sol is a student and a playwright, and she is opening tonight at Broom Street Theater her play, The Birds That Are Your Hands, which is against the backdrop of occupied borderlands, torn asunder, The Birds That Are Your Hands, 13 Ways to Start a Fire Under Siege, is a play that explores disparate yet overlapping tales of tyranny and resistance from the occupied Palestinian territories to the U.S.-Mexico border, illuminating the intricacies of empire erection and the walls that sever the very bodies who build them. So, first, thanks for coming in. I know this is an incredibly busy day for you.
It is.
I really appreciate you taking the time. I don't know of any piece of art or anything really that has tried to bring together the Palestinian experience and the U.S.-Mexico border experience. And this is coming directly out of your life experience. Can you tell us a little bit about what brought you to this point?
Absolutely. Well, throughout my life, I've always had a passion for all different issues of justice making in our world. And both in my academic and activist background, I'm working on these two border issues specifically. And these issues have so much in common and so many parallels in our world. And one of the major parallels I see is the deafening silence around them and around any kind of conversation. And actually, I spent 3 months this last spring. So last year at this time, I was working in refugee camps throughout the West Bank. And my work is in theater and anti-oppression work. So working with trauma and young people and kind of unburdening violence and all different forms of solidarity work in the occupied territories. And then this past summer, I worked in Tucson, Arizona with an organization working on human rights and immigrant rights work on the U.S.-Mexico border. And on both of these border walls that are being constructed and actually being constructed by the very same companies. We see a lot of the similar processes of racialization and othering and marking people as outside.
And so you spend time in two places that I think it's also interesting from a Madison perspective. They're very significant solidarity movements here with the Palestinian people and with Latin America in general, and certainly Mexico. And you are bridging those two. And I hope that people that are interested in both of those issues, and one or the other or both, make a point to come out and see the play, and we'll make sure that people know how to do that. It is opening tonight, hopefully a lucky Friday the 13th for you. So how did you decide that a play was the way that you wanted to express your experiences?
Absolutely. Well, I think we can approach change making from all different venues. And for me, I've always felt it through art. I've always felt it through theater and through a way of sharing stories. So the people that you'll see in this performance are kind of people in the everyday. They're everything from farmers to artists to activists, from migrants to a man that's a clown and is seen as a terrorist. So it really comes out of the character, out of these voices. I shared this line of it's not like there's a soapbox in this. It's more like offering platform to all these different voices and to these different people. So for me, I feel like art can be an opening. It can be kind of an interruption in these very limited narratives we see, and can offer through the personal a way to talk about it, a way to start this conversation, a way to get in some of the humanity beyond just victim, villain kinds of narratives, and really kind of the messy richness that is life and is real life.
And how, I have not read or seen the play yet, how do you bring these two very similar in some ways but very different experiences and geographic places together in one piece?
Well, it's complicated. That's why you'll have to come and see. But it... Through these personal narratives going through, it's actually also a multimedia performance. So there is video and fabulous sound, and it's really been an exciting opportunity to collaborate with some just really amazing people, community artists and activists working on this piece. But the borders are almost set in conversation with each other. So kind of through these stories and these overlapping narratives that are kind of collaged together, you start to see the parallels. We start to hear these voices, I think, enclosed in walling in a lot of ways. These narratives that we don't hear, this kind of getting beneath the rhetoric of terrorism, getting beneath the rhetoric of illegal, these kind of words. And having an opportunity for people to speak for themselves. I think a lot of times we also, from, in a Western perspective, we have someone speaking for.
The expert.
Exactly, the expert. Who is the Palestinian?
Right.
And so I think we can either get into Palestinian as terrorist or Palestinian as victim, but never a Palestinian voice.
Right.
And so this play tries to interrupt that kind of monolithic way of representing, or that kind of false dichotomy. And so these borders are in conversation with each other. It's kind of indigenous people's struggles in a lot of ways, and how they're linked and how they're not linked, and kind of the lapses and the connections.
So, Sol, you grew up here in Madison, and you've been an activist from a very early age, and you also founded Proud Theater here in Madison with Callan Hardy, who is the artistic director of Broom Street Theater. But you've been away doing your studies for a while. How did you decide to stage this here? Why here in Madison?
It's a really good question. Actually, I was just remembering, thinking about being in the West Bank last year at this time, and one of the things that people continuously shared with me was this urgency and this desperation to share these stories. And that while the work there is really important, while the solidarity work wherever you are in the world is so vital, there's something to me about community-based art, community-based activism, and being in our home and having conversations with each other and beginning the dialogue and the work here that feels so vital. And for me, this is a community I love. This is a community I call home. And I feel both a great responsibility, but also a great privilege to be able to be back here, back home, and talking about this with you, talking about it in the community, hoping that from this there can actually be dialogue that starts. And actually, that's part of what's been set up with the performance every Sunday night, except for the last show. So actually, every Sunday after, it's a 2:00 matinee on Sundays, this performance. So it'll be a talk-back session, and where people will actually have an opportunity to have a facilitated dialogue about these issues. But actually, in tying back to Proud Theater, what you shared, this theater company that Callan Hardy and I co-founded almost 10 years ago, actually, at this point. But it came out of the personal. It came out of stories. It came out of collaboratively creating art together to create change. And for me, having the opportunity to work at such an incredible theater as Broom Street that continues to push the edge and kind of challenge all different forms of censorship and control, and challenge its audience.
And creates an opening for playwrights like yourself.
Exactly. Where there oftentimes aren't these kind of openings. Yes, and to be working this cast, it has veteran actors of Broom Street, and it has people who have actually never performed on stage before. So it's a really exciting collaboration, and I think even the education work that's happened for us within the cast, within how do you represent these stories that are so different from yours, but also so connected to who we are as human beings.
So both of these issues, in some circles, are incredibly hot-button issues. I mean, to take on one or the other, kudos to you to take on both. You have to wonder if what you were thinking. No, I'm kidding, but really, I mean, it's hard to think. Perhaps throwing abortion in there would have been the trifecta, but as far as hot-button topics in our society, the issue of Israel-Palestine and the immigration illegal, issues with Mexico are just huge. You obviously, from a very young age, and those of our listeners who have been in Madison for a long time know your name, I'm sure, from when you were a very young person, even younger than you are today, talking very eloquently and very powerfully about the discrimination that you felt your family, as a same-sex parented family, was suffering. And, I remember, you testifying in front of legislatures, and I mean, just incredible things for, how old would you have been then? Like 10 10-year-old. I mean, for many adults, that would be an incredibly overwhelming experience. And you just... You've been impressing me for at least a decade, and so I'm sure for you, taking on these issues might be a little less intimidating than other people, but still, it had to give you pause. To what kind of process have you gone through in working through that?
That's a really good question. I think there's so much fear that comes up with these things. I think it's always scary to take those risks, to push the edge. But what comes up in me with it, again, I think back to these are these are people's lives. These are people in the everyday, and this is something that I can do. And this is something that each of us can do. I think in coming to this show, this can be something you can do.